Hey, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to another in-depth Spider-Man movie series review, and today I'm reviewing The Amazing Spider-Man. The Amazing Spider-Man is directed by Mark Webb and stars Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Rise Ifans, and a bunch of other actors. This film was released in July 2012 and made about $757,931,000 worldwide, making it the 7th highest grossing worldwide movie of 2012, which was actually a pretty good gross. So The Amazing Spider-Man is basically a reboot that retells the origins of Peter Parker turning into Spider-Man, and I'm sure you all know what the origins of Spider-Man are. Which is of course him being Peter Parker, an outcast at school, and him being bitten by a spider that gives him superpowers, and hence we have Spider-Man. So in the beginning of this movie, we actually see something that we didn't see in Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man origin in the 2002 Spider-Man film. In this scene, we see Spider-Man's dad deliver Peter to his Aunt May and Uncle Ben, and I actually do like seeing a different part of his origin to start the movie. Because other parts of the film, like their origins, are just completely recycled from the first film, but I'll get more into that later. Years later, we get a taste of Peter's life as a teenager in high school, where he's bullied by Flash Thompson, and we see that he has a crush on Gwen Stacy. I honestly just don't like Andrew Garfield's portrayal of Peter Parker. When I think of Peter Parker, I think of this outcast nerd that you really feel bad for. But Garfield's Peter is just more of a punk that likes to ride around on a skateboard, even though he's told not to. I don't know about you guys, but when I just see Garfield's Peter and his actions, it seems like if anything, he would be one of the more popular kids in school, not an outcast. So yeah, I'm not a fan of Peter Parker's portrayal in this film, and I just really don't feel for his character like I did with Maguire. And as far as Flash Thompson, he's fine in his role in this film. I mean, he just plays a pretty decent Flash Thompson, and Gwen Stacy is pretty good, I guess. At home, Peter learns that his father worked with fellow scientist Dr. Kurt Connors at Oscorp, so Peter sneaks into Oscorp and Peter enters a lab that is under development from genetically modified spiders, and of course he gets bitten by one. And he of course later discovers that he now has these spider-like abilities, and there you go, you got Spider-Man. So yeah, I really don't mind this part of the origin, but of course it's just not as interesting as Maguire's origins. Peter visits the one-armed Connors and gives Connor his father's decay rate algorithm, the missing piece in Connor's experiment on, regenerating limbs, obviously since he only has one arm. So Connors is being pressed by his superior, Dr. Ratha, to produce a cure for the dying head of Oscorp, Norman Osborn. Then we go back to Peter's life in school, and we see him basically mess around with Flash Thompson, obviously since he has his new powers to outpower him a bit, and honestly, I don't really like how he messes with Flash in the scene. Peter already seemed like a punk tough guy in the first place, not really an innocent kid that couldn't defend himself that much, so when he just messes with Flash in this scene, he just seems like a complete asshole, and it just makes me not feel for his character, really. At a nearby deli, a cashier refuses to let Peter buy milk when Peter is 2 cents short. Then a thief suddenly raids the store, and Peter just kinda doesn't do anything. And while searching for Peter, Uncle Ben attempts to stop the thief on the street, but he gets killed. And the thief escapes as Peter finds Ben dead on the sidewalk. And compared to this part of the origin in the 2002 Spider-Man film, this scene is just nothing. Yes, I know people might complain that I'm just comparing a lot of the movie to the original Spider-Man movie, but this movie basically reboots the origins, and when I see the origin of this film, I just can't help but constantly remind myself that I could be watching a much better Spider-Man origin than this. So yeah, Uncle Ben's death here has no emotional impact on me whatsoever, and in the original film, Peter seems so responsible for Uncle Ben's death, which just made it so much better. In this film, yes, Peter is slightly responsible, but Ben's death is mostly due to him being kind of an idiot and thinking he can get his old body down on the floor fast enough to get the gun. And yeah, I honestly do not care about Ben and May in this film anyways, and I find them really bland. There's just really no emotional impact for me. Afterward, Peter uses his new abilities to hunt criminals, and abruptly we have Spider-Man. Then after having dinner with the Stacys, Peter reveals that he is Spider-Man to Gwen, and they kiss. Then Connors tries to use lizard DNA on himself to help regenerate limbs. And after passing out, he awakens to find that his missing arm has been regenerated. Then Connor's skin turns green and really scaly, which makes him this violent hybrid of lizard and man. And now we have our villain for this film, Lizard. I think Lizard is such a lame and uninteresting villain. Like, this villain is so terrible and so forgettable, and whenever I think of Spider-Man villains, I just always forget about Lizard. There is nothing that interests me whatsoever about Lizard. He is just such a bland villain. So then Spider-Man snatches falling cars with his web lines and the falling cars were caused by Lizard. Spider-Man suspects Connors is the lizard and unsuccessfully confronts the creature in the sewers. Then the lizard learns Spider-Man's real identity, and he follows Peter to school where they fight. So then police start a hunt for Spider-Man and the lizard. The police corner Spider-Man and take his mask off, and Captain Stacy discovers that Spider-Man is Peter. Then the lizard makes the ultimate plan to make all humans lizard-like by releasing a chemical cloud from Oscorp's tower. Spider-Man eventually restores Connors and everyone else that was affected by it to normal, but not before the lizard wounds Captain Stacy. And before Captain Stacy's death, he requests Peter to avoid Gwen in order to keep her safe, obviously since he is Spider-Man. And it seems he does at first, but then he suggests to Gwen that he may see her after all. And that's it. So overall, I think The Amazing Spider-Man is a pretty bland and dull film. First of all, let's talk about the characters of this film. As I said, Andrew Garfield just plays a bad Peter Parker, because he just seems more of a punk, not a nerd that you feel bad for. But when he plays Spider-Man, I think he does fit the role pretty well as Spider-Man, and he just plays a pretty energetic Spider-Man, and I like that. I think Gwen Stacy is actually pretty good in this film. She's one of the more interesting characters of this film, which is what this film, didn't have a lot of, and it was nice to see a more interesting character in this film. Now moving on to the plot, I think the plot of this movie is just super boring and forgettable. In fact, I find a lot of things in this movie just boring and forgettable. So yeah, the plot and the pacing of this movie is just kind of a drag, and they basically just retread the origins that we see in the original Spider-Man film, slightly different, except in just worse ways. I'm okay with retreading some origins, but they just retread like all the origins that we saw in the original, except it's more boring this time. And although Homecoming doesn't look very good to me, I'm still looking forward to seeing it, and one thing I'm glad to see is that it will be telling sort of a different part of Peter in his teenage years, unlike this movie. The action of this film is just decent, but it's nowhere near as good as Raimi's amazing action in the original Spider-Man trilogy. The soundtrack of this movie is incredibly bland. First of all, the theme of this movie is way worse than the best Spider-Man theme, which was, of course, Danny Elfman's theme. That was just amazing. And this film's theme is just worse than the Amazing Spider-Man 2's theme, in my opinion. In fact, I actually really like the Amazing Spider-Man 2's theme. But yeah, the entire score of this film is just such boring and generic music. So yeah, this movie is bad in my opinion, and despite some good parts of the movie, it's just a pretty forgettable watch. I mean, no, it's not horrible, it's just a pretty bland watch, but I can, tolerate some things of it, but it's just a pretty bland watch, honestly. So that's my in-depth review of The Amazing Spider-Man, and in my next in-depth review, I'll be reviewing The Amazing Spider-Man 2.